my name is Beck and welcome to my March wrap up. I'm going to try and make this a rapid fire wrap up, so hopefully it's not too long. I put a couple of books down this month, but I also finished a couple and really enjoyed them. I did a reading vlog as well, and there are still 2 books that I'm currently reading, so I'm going to rehash all of that and I'll go in chronological order. Now the first book that I picked up is Daughter of the Deep by Rick Riordan. This is his standalone or his new series, and I actually picked up the audiobook for this even though I've got the physical copy, and unfortunately the writing style and the tone just wasn't for me. It follows a main character who goes to a specialist school, but I don't necessarily think it's a magical school. I think it's just a specialist school with different designations of sea creatures referring to each of their classes and specialities. So the inciting action is what got me hooked, but the storytelling and the action sequences were what alienated me, and I found it chaotic and hard to latch onto, so unfortunately I ended up putting this down at about 11%. I gave it a couple of chapters to see how the character's voice was, but ultimately it just wasn't for me, even though I do love his Percy Jackson series. I just realised I had some papers in the background, so I have moved them out of the shot. Next up, I actually finished this book, and it's Magic Bites by Alona Andrews. This is the first installment in the Kate Daniels series, which is an adult urban fantasy series. Kate Daniels is the protagonist. She's in her early 20s, and somebody close to her, like her mentor figure, ends up being murdered, and she is investigating or consulting on the case. And there are also supernatural creatures in here, like werewolves. And so this book was hyped up to me. This series is hyped up to me in general, but I've also been told that the first book is not necessarily indicative of how enjoyable the series is, and a friend of mine generally starts her reread at book 2 instead of on book 1, so that tells me that I need to give this another chance, because I gave this a 3.5 stars. Kate's voice had the tone of the early urban fantasy work with female protagonists, of like rejecting things that were kind of feminine and girly in favour of being tough, and honestly you can have both things and still be tough and vulnerable and everything. So while those things tripped me up a little bit when I was reading and it was like minutely frustrating, ultimately it was quite enjoyable, and I'm keen to continue because the world building, as far as I'm concerned, can only get better, and we've seen a few introductions of characters that I think will be recurring, so I'm looking forward to seeing all of those relationships naturally develop. I also finished Gallant by V.E. Schwab this month, and I have a separate spoiler-free review. It's only a few minutes long of this book if you are interested in seeing my thoughts about it, but this one is a standalone by Victoria Schwab, and this is an author that I've quite enjoyed in the past, so naturally I was like, I've got to try this out. This book follows a 16-year-old protagonist who can't speak, and she is an orphan, but suddenly she gets a letter from this family that she doesn't know existed, and they summon her to this mansion that might also be haunted. And so she actually is born with this innate ability that's described at the beginning, and she can see ghouls. She calls them ghouls, but they're kind of like ghosts really, and when she goes to the mansion that belonged to her family, she discovers that there are family secrets there of a supernatural nature, and I quite enjoyed this. There were a few similarities to the show The Haunting of Hill House, like the core of family and also the ghost aspect, which I really enjoyed. I think it was like a unique and well done take, and I haven't found this voice emulated by V.E. Schwab before. She's done something new with her themes and her characters, and that's why I enjoyed this. I gave it about 4.5 stars. And then next is a sad book because I love the Dresden Files, and so I was like, I'm going to try another Jim Butcher book, and this has been on my TBR for a while, and it's the Theories of Calderon. This is an adult urban fantasy, multiple perspective from Jim Butcher, and I thought I was going to be obsessed with this, and it follows, like I said, a couple of different characters, but the way they were portrayed and the writing styles and the characterization, all of the strengths basically in the Dresden Files that I loved didn't seem very strong here, and so it was sitting on a 3, maybe a 2.5 stars of a rating, and then I decided to put it down. I gave it about 170 pages and it's about 600 pages long, so I gave it a decent crack, but it was just not for me. I think I said in a recent tag video, I will link it if I remember, that this had a male gaze thing, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way in certain parts, and the pace was not what I expected. So this book is just not for me again, and it was my second DNF of the month. And then my third DNF of the month, you could probably guess it was the non-fiction book on my TBR, and that was Chasing the Scream. This followed the war on drugs and how people who used to be addicts were villainized by this guy who basically drove the entire war on drugs. Turned out that he was corrupted by the mafia, and that's why he was doing all these things for power rather than to help all of the people who were afflicted by addiction. So it's an interesting history, but if it was like a Netflix documentary or something, I'd be interested in watching it, but just reading it, it felt really dry, and so I just put it down and then I didn't pick it up, and I realized a couple of weeks in, I was like, hang on, I'm still currently reading this. This is on my Goodreads, and and I was like, if I completely forgot about it, then I'm really not interested. So I ended up putting it down. Then I read a super hyped book, The Atlas 6, and I absolutely loved this. This follows 6 characters. Ultimately, that's in the title. Who would have thought? This is a fantasy book, but it's kind of an urban fantasy of a sort, where in this world magic is realized and people know it exists, but there is this secret society of people who are academics and who study it. It's quite a dangerous scenario, and so you get the perspectives of all of these characters. And before I got into this, I know that it was self-published, and I thought, oh, after it's gone through a publisher, I think I will take to this more. And I don't know what the publisher did because I didn't read this before its re-release, but I found that the writing really must have benefited from what changes and tightening it had undergone, because I could understand the perspective and the tone of all of the different characters. I think they were very uniquely crafted, and I like how all of the characters weren't good. That's something that I really enjoyed about it. Usually you go into a story and you expect like the hero doing the good thing, but all these characters are just trying to live their lives, and they've all got faults and flaws because of it, and I think they work well together in different ways because of those flaws. So I just really liked this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. The writing style was very detailed and I just snapped it up, and I can't wait for the sequel to this, because this ended in a way that tied off loose ends but also left it open enough that you were really anticipating an ending. That said, I did anticipate a couple of things about how this might end. Like, there were characters in here who I thought, oh, you're a bit sus, and then sure enough they were sus. So it's not like it necessarily super surprised me, but I liked the way that it did things, and I'm interested to see how those things develop. And then after I read The Atlas 6, my brain was like, I think I've got to pause on taking in all the detailed fantasy stuff and read a contemporary instead, and so I finally picked up Act Your Age, Eve Brown. I've read the first 2 books in this kind of series, kind of companion set of novels, and really enjoyed them, and I read this for the Magical Gear Up readathon in preparation for the full month-long April readathon. So I really enjoyed this. I have a vlog for it as well if you want to hear my thoughts as I'm reading. I really love the main character in here, and again I loved how the relationships in this book don't rely on people lying to each other or cheating on each other or manipulating each other in order to get some kind of tension going in the story. I like how the conflicts often come from an accidental miscommunication or an accidental misunderstanding that gets resolved and discussed, rather than just ignoring it and assuming something and then letting it fester. I like how there were conversations in here, and I like how the romance is just so cute and so sexy. I think ultimately Chloe Brown was my favourite one, but I really love Danny and Eve's story as well, and there's no surprise here that I gave this another 5 stars. And then I started another hyped book, but it didn't go the way The Atlas 6 did. I started The Love Hypothesis on audiobook, and this one I thought would be great because it's got so much hype, but it was a real huge miss for me. I got about 10% into the audiobook and I was like, I don't like it. The main character has lied to her best friend already and kissed somebody without their consent, but it turned out to be okay afterwards because he was cool with it. So I'm like, I don't really like this main character already, and I'm not really into those themes and those vibes. It was very chaotic to start with as well. I'm just not about it. It wasn't for me. The writing style was just not my thing, and so I put it down. And I feel better for it because I could start a different audiobook instead. And then I read a series continuation and conclusion in Fall of the Argosy. This is in my Gear Up Readathon vlog as well, which I will link. This is the conclusion to The Way of the Argosy, and it follows Faru Parfax as she's growing up. So in the Spellslinger series, she is a side character, like a main side character, and a good mentor and support for Kellen, our protagonist. In this one though, we follow Faru as she's growing up, and there is a significant age jump in the first to the second book. And in the second book, which is this one, she was a teenager, and so she's experiencing kind of this red plague, which is a magical curse that turns people into effectively zombies that chew off their own tongues and try and attack you. You don't get turned by being bitten, you get turned by hearing the curse. And so she's trying to stop this curse, whereas she doesn't have any magic herself. And she also runs across Rosie, who is also an Argosy like Faru. So there is this interesting interweaving of characters and what makes you a person, and how all of these traumatic events can be overcome, and how the different paths become evident to you when you don't actually know what your purpose in life is. I really like the general messages of these books, but this one felt a little bit short compared to the other one. I like the first book better, I think. The second half of it had more of a punch, and this one, while I enjoyed it, it didn't hit me as much as I wanted it to, but I still did really enjoy it. I think I gave it about a 3.5 or a 4 stars, and the other one I gave a 4.5 stars. So this one is definitely not as good as the first one, but I still enjoyed different aspects of it, and I wish this book kept to the first 4 pages, because the first 4 pages were like the opening to like a magnificent cinematic masterpiece, and then the rest of it kind of like peaked from that point and then coasted the rest, with little up and down bits in between, but sometimes I found that I was skimming, and I didn't do that with the first book. So I liked it, not my favourite, happy that I finished the series, and keen to read more of Sebastian de Castell in the future. And then I'm currently reading Two Things Still. I was hoping to have them done by the end of this month, but the end of this month just got a bit chaotic when it came to life things, so that just happens sometimes. But I'm currently reading or listening to the audiobook for Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is a sci-fi, super action-packed, rather dramatic in a very good way. I'm really enjoying my reread, and I love the audiobook narration. It is brilliant, so I'm really enjoying myself on audiobook re-listening to that one. And then physically I'm rereading something as well, which I don't actually have on me right this second, but that is The Hero of Ages, which is the 3rd Mistborn book, and I've reread the first 2, and now obviously I'm rereading the last one because I'm really looking forward to the last book in Era 2 coming out at the end of this year. So I'm kind of trying to reread everything in time to catch up so that my knowledge is all refreshed. So hopefully I end up finishing The Hero of Ages during April, because I'm doing that month-long readathon, and to put a 700 or 800 page book into a month-long readathon is not a very smart thing to do, but apparently I've done it, so wish me luck. But if you've read any of these books, do let me know down below in the comments. I really look forward to talking to you. If you don't know what to put in the comments, just some blue emojis would be awesome. But thank you again so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.